Hello, and welcome back to Podfinder. My name is Philip, and I'm here to talk about Pathfinder 1st Edition. Today's video is another summary of the events of a Pathfinder AP, in this case, the classic Curse of the Crimson Throne, the first AP I ever ran in the Pathfinder system. Curse of the Crimson Throne is an urban adventure set in the Varisian city-state of Korvosa. It tells a mainly self-contained narrative which touches on the events of some of the other Varisian APs, namely Rise of the Runelords, Shattered Star, and Return of the Runelords. Curse is an absolutely fantastic AP, merging elements of urban intrigue and insurgency with ancient conspiracies, horrific plagues, and even some minor wilderness exploration into a memorable narrative. It serves as an incredible follow-up to Rise of the Runelords, telling a story which is completely different in tone, but no less impressive in its scope. This is widely considered to be one of the very best Paizo APs, so I'm very excited to share this story with you all. Before that, though, if you enjoy this video and want to hear more Pathfinder lore, consider subscribing, or commenting below. Or, if you want to support the channel directly, check out my Patreon. Just $2 a month gets you access to all my scripts, as well as the audio files for all my scripted videos, all of which drop at least a week early. Let me begin with something which should be obvious. Spoiler alert. This video actively spoils major plot points in the Curse of the Crimson Throne adventure path, and may reference information in the Rise of the Runelords AP. Do not watch this video if you intend to play or read those products, and need to remain spoiler-free. Also, content warning. Curse of the Crimson Throne has several load-bearing elements of the plot, and one of them is the outbreak of a deadly plague. I can't talk about this story without getting into the nitty-gritty of a plague narrative, but I also realize that, given what we all lived through a few years ago, not everyone will want to listen to that. If you think hearing about a fictional plague might bring up some bad memories or past traumas, maybe skip this video, and probably avoid this campaign altogether. Alright, with that out of the way, let's dig in. Backstory and Prelude. Curse of the Crimson Throne is the second AP ever written for the Pathfinder universe, predating even the Pathfinder 1E rule set as its own system. It made for a fascinating contrast to its predecessor, Rise of the Runelords. Where Rise was a fantastical road trip around Varisia, Curse is an exploration of urban intrigue. While not as tightly focused as later urban campaigns like Hell's Rebels or Curtain Call, Curse still stands out among early Paizo APs as having a claustrophobic feel within a single location. But what about the actual backstory for this campaign? I'm going to cover this story a little differently than how I discussed the Runelords saga. Curse is a narrative built on intrigue and mystery, and I want to preserve some of those story elements. For that reason, I'm going to stick to the backstory elements which the PCs might already be familiar with when the campaign begins. The deeper mysteries will be revealed as the story goes on, at about the time when they would become known to the players. I'll be moving some reveals around a bit and condensing them together to make the narrative structure of this video flow a little better, but the general structure of the mystery will remain the same. The story begins with the Chelaxian colonization of Varisia. In 4407, the Chelish Imperial Navy landed a force of Marines at the site of an enormous black pyramid in southeastern Varisia, which dated to the Thessalonian period. These Marines, led by Field Marshal Old Korvosa, established a fort in the area, hoping to use it as a military outpost. After several conflicts with the local Shoanti, a settlement steadily grew around the fortress, and the eventual city of Korvosa was founded. As the city grew, the fort intended to protect it was moved to the top of the Black Pyramid, which the Chelaxians called the Grand Mastaba. This improved fortress was first completed in 4464, and was dubbed Castle Korvosa. Korvosa grew as a Chelish colony for more than a century, until the Chelish Civil War after the death of Eredin. As Cheliax lost the ability to materially support Korvosa, the denizens of the city-state grew discontent with foreign rule, and an independence movement slowly built up steam. In 4644, the people of Korvosa declared their independence and named Eodred Arabasti, the city magistrate at the time, King Eodred I. Over the next 64 years, 5 monarchs ruled Korvosa, and the city steadily grew in wealth and prosperity. 2 things unified the monarchs of Korvosa: their affection for construction projects and their propensity for mysterious deaths, at least in the minds of the people. Upon the city's independence, King Eodred I began making modifications and additions to the castle Korvosa. Each subsequent ruler in the city-state's history made further additions to the castle, resulting in a palace layout and skyline which is striking in its weirdness. The other notable connection between the monarchs of Korvosa was the air of mystery surrounding their deaths. The rumor mill in Korvosa proved especially fruitful regarding the city's leadership. As each leader died, rumors crept up among the common folk that their deaths had been mysterious, unsolvable, or otherwise suspicious. The truth of this was dubious at best, but regardless, the public soon developed the idea of the Curse of the Crimson Throne, a terrible curse which doomed every monarch of the city to a shadowy death. According to popular consensus, the curse inflicted by the throne ensures that no monarch of the city will ever produce an heir once they've taken power, and they will never die of old age. Of the 5 monarchs who ruled Korvosa, the most influential was doubtlessly Domina Arabasti I, who ruled from 4667 to 4686. Domina's deep ancestral and cultural connection to Cheliax helped her in rebuilding trade relations with the Empire of Devils. The wealth these trade relations brought in helped her to import substantial Chelish influence to the city, including the construction of a large temple to Asmodeus. She also reinforced the city's defenses, and a number of other buildings throughout the city. She bore a single son as her heir, Archapelus, who would go on to take up the name Eodred II once the time came for him to ascend. Importantly, Eodred II had been born prior to Domina's ascension to the throne, and she bore no more children after she ascended to power. While the reign of Queen Domina would be generally considered a golden age for Korvosa, she certainly made several mistakes during her time in power. Most notably, she used the wealth at her disposal to attempt to enlist the services of several Hell Knight orders from Cheliax. After failing to win over the orders of the Rack, the Scourge, and the Godclaw, she finally won over the Order of the Nail by offering to construct for them a new fortress outside of her city. Per the agreement, Queen Domina constructed Citadel Verade in the nearby Mindspin Mountains. But once she gifted it to the Order of the Nail, the Hell Knights proved unwilling to heed her commands. The Nail Knights, as I like to call them, refused to serve as Queen Domina's personal police or security force, and had no interest in extending her reach through military conquest. Instead, they settled into Citadel Verade and began to work toward their own goal of purging the uncivilized parts of society, meaning the Shoanti, from the Varisian countryside. Despite the magnitude of this mistake, however, Queen Domina never considered it her greatest shame. Unbeknownst to anyone outside of her inner circle, Queen Domina had a second son. This child, a boy named Venster, was a Cambion, meaning a hellspawn Nephilim. Horrified by the diabolic taint which this child represented, Queen Domina locked him away within one of Castle Korvosa's many towers. Venster would grow up isolated and alone, only ever visited by his brother Eodred, with whom he shared an affection for card games and Varisian harrow readings. Within his heart, however, the seeds of jealousy were planted deep. Eodred II ascended to the throne in 4686 AR, after the death of his mother. While he lacked much of his mother's political skill and personal charisma, he proved an effective king, especially in regard to trade and economics. The most talked-about aspect of Eodred's rule, however, was his notable affection for young women. He remained unmarried for much of his reign, but all of that changed in 4704. Ileosa Arvanxi was young, beautiful, and ambitious. Born to a wealthy noble house in the Chelaxian city of Westcrown, Ileosa wanted far more for herself than the comfortable life which was expected of her. Hearing of Eodred and his questionable tastes, she recognized an opportunity. She abandoned her family and traveled to Korvosa, where she quickly made contact with King Eodred. She wielded her charm, appearance, and wit with precision, and successfully seduced the king. After a shockingly brief courtship, the pair were married, and in 4704, Ileosa became Queen Ileosa Arabasti of Korvosa. She was only 17. 4 years later, where the story begins in the winter of 4708, Ileosa has been quietly isolated from any real power. King Eodred may have little interest in governing, but he's unwilling to share power with his young wife. The castle seneschal, Neolandus Calipopoulos, openly dislikes her and uses his substantial influence to keep her away from any authority. The noble families of Korvosa, likewise, never overcame their distaste for the young woman, who they still consider an outsider at best and a gold digger at worst. And still, the people of Korvosa are anxious, for Eodred II is getting older, and still Ileosa has produced no heir. The curse of the Crimson Throne, it would seem, is ready to wreak havoc on the city once again. Book 1. Edge of Anarchy. Curse of the Crimson Throne kicks off when the player characters, whom I'll be referring to as the Korvosan heroes, receive an invitation to the home of Zalara Esmeralda, a Varisian fortune-teller and harrower of some renown in the poorest neighborhoods of Korvosa. Zalara greets the heroes once they arrive at her dwelling, then reveals her reason for calling the group together. All the heroes have been wronged by a local criminal named Gaedren Lamb, a trait which Zalara herself shares. Gaedren murdered Zalara's son a year prior, and she hopes that the heroes will work with her to enact her revenge. Once the heroes agree to join Zalara's quest, she seals their partnership by performing a harrowing, a reading of omens through the use of a storied deck of harrow cards. Harrow readings play a major role in the story from this point forward, and serve as a connecting thread for the narrative as it twists and turns through the streets of Korvosa and beyond. For more information on the history of the harrow and the beliefs surrounding it, check out the lore section of my video on the Stolen Fate adventure path. The Korvosan heroes then follow Zalara's instructions to Gaedren Lamb's hideout on the banks of the Jaeger River. Invading the hideout, the heroes confront and defeat Lamb and his lieutenants, freeing the many enslaved orphans and children they had forced into servitude. In Lamb's private office, the heroes discover 2 items of note. The first is a brooch, an elaborate piece of jewelry marked with an imp and a house drake, beasts which have become indicative of Korvosa as a city. The second item is even more severe, Zalara's head, preserved in tar. This is when Zalara manifests before the heroes and reveals the truth. She had attempted to deal with Gaedren a year prior, which resulted in her murder at his hands. Her hatred tied her soul to the magical deck of harrow cards back at her house, and it took the better part of a year to manifest the strength necessary to summon like-minded persons to her aid, so her quest for vengeance might be complete. Now, however, Zalara is confused, since her mission is complete. Now it seems that only her love and concern for Korvosa and its people seems to be tethering her to the mortal world. Unsure of how to proceed, she asks the Korvosan heroes to carry her harrow deck with them in their future adventures. Before the heroes can take further action, though, all of Korvosa is alerted by the sound of clanging bells all across the city. While the bells of Korvosa toll throughout the week for a variety of reasons, such a sudden and unannounced alarm can only mean one thing. King Eodred Erebasti II has died. Long live the Queen. In the days immediately following Eodred's death, Korvosan society explodes like a powder keg. Nobles and common folk alike are horrified that Ileosa, whom they consider little more than an opportunistic child, has inherited the throne from her late husband. Everyone is worried about economic collapse, and the anxiety grows steadily. The 3 military orders in the city, the Korvosan Guard, the Sable Company Marines, and the Order of the Nail, increase their presence on the streets, but this does little to alleviate tensions. The Nail Knights actually seem to be making things worse with their prejudicial treatment of the Varisians and Shoan-Ti. On top of that, the city's population of pests, imps conjured from the local academy, and house drakes who prey upon them, erupts into an informal war, such that the skies over the city become miniature battlefields at the drop of a hat. Amidst all this chaos, the Korvosan heroes report the brooch they found among Gaedren Lamb's possessions to the palace guard, thinking it must have been stolen from a noble. Much to their surprise, they're summoned to Castle Korvosa itself, where they are led into the throne room and presented to none other than Queen Ileosa. Ileosa, dressed in her formal mourning clothes and flanked by her sworn bodyguard Sabina Marin, greets the heroes and thanks them for finding and returning the brooch which she had thought lost. She hopes that it will bring her some comfort in the trying days ahead. She notes that, in the upcoming time of transition, Korvosa will be in need of competent heroes to keep the peace. She suggests that the heroes make their way to the offices of the Korvosan Guard and offer their services to their commander, Cressida Croft. The heroes report to Field Marshal Cressida Croft at Citadel Volscienic, the headquarters of the Korvosan Guard on the banks of the Jaguar River. Field Marshal Croft accepts the heroes' offer of aid and deputizes them. She introduces them to one of her allies, the swordmaster Vencarlo Oricini, who runs a dueling academy in the Old Korvosa district on the north end of the city. Croft and Oricini send the heroes on a series of missions to help bring stability to the city, and along the way reveal that things are much worse than the people of Korvosa realize. Small-scale riots have broken out and been suppressed multiple times. Dock workers, teamsters, and caravan guards have all stopped working to some degree, and even those who do work are still receiving very few shipments. Trade caravans and merchant ships have begun avoiding the city for fear of revolts, so the city is consuming far more food than it is taking in. As if that wasn't enough, Neolandus Calipopoulos, the castle seneschal, is missing. In the Korvosan political structure, the seneschal is one of the greatest checks on the power of the throne, and Neolandus's absence is a tremendous loss in this time of trial. The heroes undertake a series of missions to attempt to stabilize the situation in the city, during one of which they are introduced to a Shoanti shaman named Thousand Bones. Thousand Bones was, until recently, attempting to negotiate peaceful relations between his people and the Korvosans. This ended when his son was murdered during the recent riots. Now he seeks only the return of his son's body, which has been stolen by a Korvosan necromancer. The heroes, on Croft's orders, recover the body, though the necromancer himself is never caught. Fed up with the evils of Korvosa, Thousand Bones returns to his people's ancestral home on the Storval Plateau to mourn. While the heroes undertake these missions, they become aware of a growing discontent in the city. As the days drag into weeks, rumors begin to swirl that King Eodred's sudden death, originally blamed on a form of leprosy, was in fact caused by a clever and subtle poison. These rumors reach a fever pitch when Queen Ileosa herself levels a terrible accusation. She claims that a young painter named Trinia Sabor is wanted for questioning in relation to Eodred's death. The implication is clear. Trinia had been tasked with the production of a portrait for His Majesty, and her youth and beauty certainly would have caught the lecherous Eodred's eye. The young painter certainly would have had an opportunity to poison the king. Even as Ileosa levels her accusation, however, the Korvosan heroes are called before Field Marshal Croft. Croft and Oricini agree that Ileosa's public declaration is suspicious, and at the very least ill-considered. Trinia Sabor is now as likely to be lynched as she is captured, and even if she is arrested safely, any trial she receives will be incredibly unfair due to public opinion. Croft assigns the heroes a new task: safely capture Sabor and bring her under the protection of the Korvosan Guard. The heroes enter the Shingles, a haphazard neighborhood in Korvosa known for its winding streets and multi-leveled walkways. They race against the Knights from the Order of the Nail, who are going door to door searching for the accused poisoner, but eventually they track down Trinia's house. The painter, though, attempts an escape, and only after a daring rooftop chase do the heroes succeed in capturing her. From here, the official narrative splits. Depending on the results of the chase, Trinia is either captured by the Queen's forces or handed off to the Korvosan Guard, at which point Croft hands her over to Vencarlo Oricini for safekeeping. I'm going to proceed with the idea that the heroes capture her, then hand her off, since that's what happened at my table. The narrative converges soon after, regardless of the outcome. Not long after, the heroes soon hear some surprising news. Trinia Sabor is scheduled for execution. Croft and Oricini are as surprised as anyone by the speed of the announcement, especially in the case where Trinia evaded capture by the Queen's forces. Arriving at the square beneath Castle Korvosa, the heroes enter the crowd to see the horrid display. Queen Ileosa arrives, flanked as ever by her bodyguard Sabina Marin, who is now outfitted in a brand new set of striking silver plate, accented with a red cloak and scarlet plumage. Soon, the headsman emerges and presents his charge, Trinia Sabor. The heroes, though, recognize that this is just a clever substitution. The young woman isn't Trinia, just someone of the same height, build, and hair color. For the crowd, and anyone who would have only seen her at a passing distance, though, it's an effective ruse. The ceremony commences with a speech by the new queen, but as Trinia is brought to the gallows, something unexpected happens. From the crowd emerges a living legend, Blackjack, the vigilante hero of Korvosan legend. One part Batman, one part Zorro, Blackjack has watched over Korvosa for centuries, ensuring that the poor and downtrodden have some hope for justice in a world of nobles and merchants. Blackjack storms the gallows, disarming and dispatching all in his way. He grabs the Trinia stand-in, and the pair make a daring escape through the crowd, all as Ileosa and her guards flee the scene. As Blackjack crests the building on the far side of the square, he turns and brandishes his rapier, then shouts for all to hear, "Let us indeed usher in justice, but let that be justice for Korvosa, not this shabby excuse for a monarchy. Long live Korvosa! Down with the Queen!" Book 2. 7 Days to the Grave. In the wake of Blackjack's sudden and dramatic return, life in Korvosa settles into an uneasy period of anticipation. How the Queen will react to this challenge to her authority is anyone's guess, but no one is expecting anything good. The first hints at the horrors to come arrive when the heroes are called back to Citadel Volscienic. There, Cressida informs them of reports which have crossed her desk. An alarming number of her guards have resigned from their posts, all women. From what she's heard, the same is true for the Marines of the Sable Company. She and her officers are worried that someone is recruiting a new fighting force in the city, and hints point that it might be the Queen herself. Croft then informs the heroes that they've been removed from official employment by the Korvosan Guard. She needs them to act off the books from now on, since she trusts them to act in the city's best interest. Soon after, the heroes receive an invitation to Orsini Academy in Old Korvosa. Arriving, they meet Swordmaster Vencarlo, who brings them to the back room where he reveals someone of import, Trinia Sabor, by which I mean the real Trinia. Vencarlo explains that Blackjack dropped the false Trinia off and demanded that the Swordmaster smuggle her out of the city. He then hand-waves away further questions by explaining that he'd worked with Blackjack on a few previous occasions many years ago. Having already gotten the false Trinia out of the city, he then asks the heroes to escort the real Trinia out of town as well, to the small town of Hars, where an old adventuring companion has agreed to house her in safety. The heroes agree, and soon find themselves on a cart headed for Hars. Out in Hars, Zilara, the spectral fortune-teller, manifests before the heroes. She feels a dread emanating from her harrow deck, a wickedness she cannot explain. She performs a harrowing for the heroes, and the portents are grim. The cards paint a picture of mass death, of rotting flesh and flocks of crows descending to pick at the corpses. Hundreds of women are gathered together, their skin the color of ash, and their faces erased. The unease in the city surrounding Ileosa's coronation is replaced with horror and sorrow, and Korvosa is left a hollowed-out shell of its former glory. Zilara insists that this must be why she has remained behind after avenging the death of her son. Her people, the people of Korvosa, are in danger, and she must do what she can to prevent this doom, even if the visions of what lies ahead are only vague. She asks the heroes to continue bearing her deck as they return to the city and deal with whatever challenges lie ahead. Unfortunately, while the heroes are out of town, something alarming happens. In the dead of night, a ship bearing a single yellow lantern drifts toward Korvosa. The Korvosan Guard notice the ship and order it away several times. They know what a single yellow light signifies: plague. Finally, as the ship travels up the Jaguar River, the guards open fire. A well-aimed trebuchet hits its mark and sinks the ship, but the yellow light was spotted by many, and now a fear of plague grips the common folk. By the time the heroes return to Korvosa, the city has changed dramatically. Just like Field Marshal Croft suspected, a new military order has been formed: the Grey Maidens. Led by the fearsome Sabina Marin, the Grey Maidens are an all-female fighting force of heavily armored warriors. They're outfitted in gleaming silver plate, accented with red fabric, and their full-face helms give them an eerily homogeneous appearance. They specialize in shield wall tactics, making them tremendously effective in Korvosa's narrow streets. This shifts the balance of power in the city severely. Previously, the Korvosan Guard answered to the city government broadly, while the Sable Company was paid for by a recurring contract and answered directly to the Seneschal. The Order of the Nail was always independent, though they would take paid jobs from the city or even the throne directly on a case-by-case basis. The Grey Maidens answer to Queen Ileosa directly, giving the throne a huge amount of power it has never before wielded. All this gives Field Marshal Croft and her allies a growing sense of dread, and they're less willing than ever to give their new queen the benefit of the doubt. When the heroes return, Croft asks them to remain on standby, for she is sure that something is about to pop off. Unfortunately, she's about to be proven right in the worst way possible. Over the next few days, a new disease takes hold in Korvosa. At first, it's limited to the lower classes. Beggars and thieves are the first to succumb, falling ill with a mixture of symptoms which are severe and fast-acting. This new disease, defined by intense coughing fits and increasingly severe blisters on the face and neck, swiftly spreads among the poor and develops a terrifying moniker: Bloodveil. Soon, the heroes find themselves drawn into the fight against the plague, as friends and allies they've made on earlier missions request their aid. They first make contact with the Church of Abadar, the organization in the city which is best suited to combat the plague. The Abadarian Church, however, must overcome its internal beliefs regarding the need to charge for healing services. After working with the well-meaning and increasingly disillusioned priest Ishani Datri, the heroes discover that the Church of Abadar has also been severely crippled by Bloodveil, with a huge number of priests falling ill in rapid succession. Into this nightmare march the Grey Maidens, escorting a small army of plague doctors. Queen Ileosa acted quickly upon hearing the news of the plague, and summoned from Cheliax a well-regarded physician, Dr. Reiner Devalis. Devalis and his medical apprentices were teleported to Korvosa, and Ileosa immediately granted them free reign over the city to combat the plague. Now, squads of doctors travel the streets of Korvosa, escorted by the Grey Maidens, establishing quarantine zones around infected houses and neighborhoods, and carrying patients off to their base of operations in the Hospice of the Blessed Maiden for treatment. Meanwhile, the Korvosan heroes undertake a series of missions intended to keep order as Bloodveil ravages the city. They investigate and unveil a conspiracy to sell quack cures to the public, bringing the perpetrators to justice. They clear out an infestation of lesser vampires who are preying upon the many corpses which are beginning to pile up in the streets. They put down a rebellion movement among the subterranean were-rat gangs in the city. They even infiltrate a wealthy manor house, whose owner had thrown a party for the local nobility, only for all of the attendees to rapidly succumb to disease and zombification. This last mission was a fantastic callback to the Mask of the Red Death, and I really liked it. As all this is going on, Ileosa and her allies impose increasingly strict lockdowns on the city. The Order of the Nail flees the city, unwilling to tolerate the risk of disease among their ranks. At the same time, recruitment to the Grey Maidens is becoming increasingly aggressive, and some young women are being forcefully drafted into the order from the city's other military branches. The most drastic action, however, is the isolation of Old Korvosa. Old Korvosa is a name given to the northern district of the city, close to the original fort around which the city was founded. These neighborhoods are old and poor, with little in the way of civic planning or financial investment to keep them in order. As these neighborhoods become increasingly infected, Ileosa elects to abandon the district entirely, and her Grey Maidens destroy the bridges connecting it to the rest of the city. Thus, the people of Old Korvosa are left to fend for themselves, their survival left to fate and the gods. Now, please excuse me for a moment while I do some editorializing. I first ran this AP with my college roommates back in 2016 or 2017. That campaign fell apart, but I started it over as a duet campaign with my wife a few years later, specifically in early spring of 2020. And let me tell you, this plague plotline hit a little harder in 2020 than I think the writers originally intended. We were locked in our little apartment, playing this on a steamer trunk which we'd converted into a coffee table. In between sessions, we'd wipe down our groceries with disinfectant, figure out how to work from home, and watch the infection rates in our county get higher and higher. My GM PC was a paladin, and I gotta say I was really envious of his disease immunity. Alright, back to the plot. In desperation, Field Marshal Croft asks the heroes to undertake a dangerous mission, to explore the wreck of the plague ship at the bottom of the Jigare River. Employing magic, the heroes enter the river and locate the shipwreck, which they soon learn is called the Direption. Investigating the wreck, the heroes discover something strange. The ship only bore a single passenger when it was sunk. That passenger was a man dressed in dark robes, and in his possession were two items of particular note: a journal referencing a woman named Andyzen, and a book called Feeding Your Hunger, the holy text of Urgathoa, goddess of undeath, consumption, and disease. Upon further research back in the city, the heroes confirm that Andyzen is the name of a known Urgathoan cult leader in Avestan. With these clues pointing at a conspiracy, the heroes then investigate the Hospice of the Blessed Maiden, where Reiner de Vallis and his plague doctors coordinate their efforts. The heroes notice that, after several days of observation, the number of patients entering the building far exceeds the number leaving, even accounting for the corpses of the deceased. Their suspicions raised, the heroes break in and to discover back rooms filled with the dead and dying, all being experimented upon by masked plague doctors and guarded by Grey Maidens. Dr. de Vallis himself confronts the heroes and dies in the resulting struggle, refusing to be brought in for questioning. This is not the end of the heroes' investigation, however, as they quickly discover a hidden basement level beneath the hospice. Entering this basement, the heroes make a horrifying discovery: a cult of Urgathoa, which appears to have bioengineered Bloodveil with the help of a local necromancer, a powerful vampiric alchemist, and even a conjured leucodaemon. The heroes assault the cult's base, eventually confronting even Lady Andyzen, the leader. Despite Andyzen's power, and her surprise transformation into a daughter of Urgathoa, she's unable to escape, and the heroes exterminate the cultists. The heroes then gather the notes of the many cultic researchers and bring them to their allies in the Korvosan Guard, allowing them to synthesize a cure for Bloodveil. Though the rollout is swift and relatively cheap, it takes weeks to pass the cure out to the city's thousands of residents. Soon, though, the plague is under control, at least outside of Old Korvosa, which remains under isolated quarantine. Queen Ileosa, for her part, claims no knowledge of Reiner de Vallis' apparent alliance with the Urgathoan cult. The supposedly good doctor tricked her and took advantage of her desperation to save her people. Any outrage at such an idea is undercut, at least momentarily, by the relief at the end of Bloodveil as a societal threat. Weeks pass, and even as the city recovers from the plague, tensions continue to mount. The Grey Maidens grow increasingly prevalent and bold, and their power is augmented by a series of increasingly draconian edicts from Queen Ileosa. While Korvosa has escaped one tragedy, no one is convinced that the city is out of danger just yet. Book 3. Escape from Old Korvosa. Book 3 begins when Queen Ileosa announces a surprise public address to her subjects, giving the citizens less than an hour to assemble at the base of the Grand Mastaba Pyramid. The heroes arrive in time to see Ileosa emerge from Castle Korvosa, wearing a new 7-pointed crown, and flanked by her retinue. Sabina Marin remains by her side, but she's also joined by a rotund man in elegant robes. Ileosa addresses the crowd, introducing the newcomer as Togomor, a powerful mage who will be replacing Neolandus Calipopoulos as the castle seneschal. Neolandus, she claims, fled the city. Ileosa then makes a startling announcement. The Grey Maidens will now be the official security force in the city, with Sabina Marin acting as the general for all forces within Korvosa. Then Ileosa immediately terminates the city's contract with the Sable Company Marines and orders their commander, Marcus Endrin, to turn in his badge of office. Endrin, completely sidelined by this, approaches the queen, then hurls his badge into her face. He draws his bow, shouting, "Your reign ends now! Korvosa will be free again!" Then lets fly an arrow. His shot strikes true, and the arrow buries itself in Ileosa's temple. For a moment, the whole square falls silent. Then, to the shock of everyone, Ileosa moves. She reaches one hand up and pulls the arrow from her skull, then moves forward and latches an iron grip around Marcus Endrin's throat. She hoists him high into the air with one hand, seemingly with little effort or strain, then plunges his own arrow into his throat. Even as his body falls, Ileosa turns and addresses her people. "This shall be the fate of all enemies of Korvosa. Mark well his punishment. It is only the first." Then she is teleported back to the safety of her castle by Togamor. Korvosa reels from this sudden display of political and arcane power, and the PCs soon find themselves summoned back to Citadel Volscienic. Field Marshal Croft greets them at her woefully understaffed fort, explaining that the Korvosan Guard's funding has been redirected to the Grey Maidens, leaving Croft with no way to sustain her forces. She then explains that she has a new mission for the heroes, one which might stop the city from falling further into Ileosa's clutches. Croft explains that, for years, Swordmaster Vencarlo Oricini has acted as her unofficial eyes and ears in regards to public opinion. This continued even as he was trapped in Old Korvosa, when the quarantine was implemented. His most recent missive is the most urgent, claiming some knowledge of dark magics at the heart of Queen Ileosa's corruption, and even claiming that Vencarlo might have answers regarding the missing seneschal Neolandus Calipopoulos. But, of course, there's a catch. Croft has lost the ability to contact Vencarlo, and his messages have ceased. She asks the heroes to take on their most dangerous mission yet, to enter Old Korvosa, Snake Plissken style, and recover Vencarlo, then act upon his information and get out once again. The heroes, well aware of the desperate situation in Korvosa, agree. Before they depart, Zilara manifests before the heroes once again, explaining that the portents of her hero deck have shifted. Korvosa's doom is still oncoming, but it's taking on a new form. She performs another harrowing, and her cards now speak of despotic rulers and poor common folk oppressed by tyrants. The cards liken these wicked rulers to predators, praying mantises who strike with cruel serrated claws, or tigers who blend into their surroundings as if by magic before pouncing from the shadows. Zilara's messages are grim, but her warnings provide far more wisdom than may appear at first glance. The Korvosan heroes enter Old Korvosa by boat, under the cover of darkness. They spend their first hours in the district getting acquainted with the political landscape, and what a landscape it has become. Two factions currently wield power in the district. In the west, the wealthy Arcona family has sent out its house guard to enforce order and prevent exploitation of the most vulnerable. Some investigation, however, reveals that the Arconas have historically been involved with various criminal elements in the city, implying that their motivations are mixed at best. In the east, a new power has risen. A gang leader has organized enough muscle behind him to claim substantial territory, and has stylized himself as the Emperor of Old Korvosa. The Emperor's roving gangs of thugs now patrol the streets. Navigating the crowded and disease-ridden streets, the heroes make their way to Vencarlo's home, located not far from his dueling academy. They explore the surprisingly humble abode, searching for the missing swordmaster. Suddenly, from the shadows, emerge two figures in red leather armor. In their hands, they wield sawtooth sabers, and on their heads, they wear masks fashioned into the likeness of a mantis. These are Red Mantis assassins, and they attack the heroes. The heroes fight back fiercely and are eventually victorious, but such an encounter is alarming. Why would the Red Mantis be targeting them? Or why would they be targeting Vencarlo? As they conclude their examination of Vencarlo's house, though, The heroes temporarily forget these questions as they stumble upon another surprise. Tucked away in a closet is an unassuming black chest, within which are arranged an all-black outfit with a distinctive black hood and a shining silver rapier, the regalia of Blackjack. The heroes beat a hasty retreat from the house, but before they can come to terms with the fact that the legendary Blackjack is their missing swordmaster, they catch a glimpse of someone waving them over. One of Vencarlo's former students has been watching the house, and informs the heroes that Vencarlo had been forced to flee a few nights prior when the Red Mantis attempted to kill him. The student doesn't know where he went, but does have another lead. He points the heroes in the direction of a local painter with whom Vencarlo had been meeting frequently in the days leading up to his flight. That local painter is Salvator Scream. Salvator Scream is a Korvosan painter of some renown. He's widely acknowledged for his macabre imagery and gruesome subject matter, and most of his work focuses on ideas of pain, death, and suffering. As the heroes investigate Scream's home in Old Korvosa, they discover that the property has been abandoned for some time, with little evidence of recent habitation other than an unfinished painting of a fearsome blue dragon. They do, however, run into an unexpected squatter, a cleric of Zon Kuthon named Lowry Vaus. Lowry introduces herself and explains that she's been seeking Salvator Scream to attempt to recruit him as a painter in the courts of Nidal. She also thanks the PCs for having defeated Lady Andaizen, whom Lowry had been hoping to bring to justice for having long ago spread plague in Nidal. In gratitude, she then explains that Salvator has been kidnapped by the Emperor of Old Korvosa, and proposes that she and the heroes work together in freeing Salvator from his imprisonment. The heroes and Lowry head east into the Emperor's territory, and, through a combination of force, guile, and diplomacy, manage to locate and rescue Salvator, killing the Emperor and dismantling his power structure in the process. Upon interviewing Salvator, the heroes gain some tremendously useful information. The painter confirms that he is a friend of Neolandus Kallipopolis, having met the seneschal through his connections in the world of fine art. He further explains that, on the day of King Eodred's death only a few months ago, Neolandus stumbled into Salvator's home, disheveled and covered in injuries. The seneschal had kept his lips mostly shut about the dangers he was facing, but made it clear that he was not safe to travel openly in the city, and it was Queen Ileosa's fault. Salvator did what he could to patch up his friend, but he knew that his home was no fortress. In desperation, he turned to some powerful friends, the Arcona family. The Arconas had been Salvator's patrons on several occasions, and he knew that they were both wealthy and politically powerful. If anyone could protect Neolandus, perhaps they could. Or so he thought, for after he had brought the seneschal to the Arcona's palace on the western side of the island, they shut their gates to him, and he became increasingly convinced that their intentions in holding Kallipopolis were not entirely benign. These concerns were only heightened when the swordmaster Vencarlo Orsini started meeting with Salvator, begging for a hint about the location of Neolandus. Vencarlo informed the artist of the Arcona's connections to the criminal underworld in Korvosa, and brought up the idea that they might be holding the seneschal hostage. Salvator then explains that Vencarlo hasn't visited him in several days. With all this information, coupled with the knowledge that Vencarlo is Blackjack, the heroes make a simple deduction. Vencarlo, in the guise of Blackjack, likely attempted to storm the Arcona palace and rescue Neolandus. Given his absence in recent days, he likely failed in this attempt. The Korvosan heroes set out for the Arcona palace, allowing Lowry Vaus to transport Salvator Scream out of the city, to the relative safety of Nidal. When the heroes approach the Arcona estate, they are greeted by guards and allowed inside for an audience with the patriarch of the family, Glorio Arcona. Glorio receives the heroes in his opulent mansion, offering them food and drink. When the heroes ask him about Vencarlo and Neolandus, he surprises them with his open villainy and arrogance. He admits that the two men are his distinguished guests, and are being held in the dungeons beneath his palace, a place called the Vivified Labyrinth. Though he's unwilling to simply let the men go, due to how valuable they are, he does offer the heroes an opportunity. In gratitude for having eliminated the Emperor of Old Korvosa, who'd been vexing him since the quarantine began, he shows them the entrance to the dungeons, and promises that if they can retrieve the men and emerge safely, they will be allowed to leave unmolested. The heroes enter the vivified labyrinth and proceed through the dungeon. While this is largely a busy work-style dungeon crawl, I do need to call out the coolness of the dungeon itself. The main floor of the dungeon consists of 4 circular stone discs, with rooms built upon them. The discs are arranged in a 2x2 grid, and each one rotates about its center. The discs are rotated by pulling levers in the rooms, so players can dynamically move the dungeon about as they progress. I ran this in person and cut out small paper maps which I rotated in real time as the players explored. It was super cool, and I would love to see more ideas like this explored by Paizo in the future. Within the vivified labyrinth, the heroes defeat a number of Glorio's servants and soldiers, including sphinxes, undead warriors, and even rakshasas. Most alarmingly, the heroes confront and defeat Melia Arcona, Glorio's sister, who is herself revealed to be a rakshasa. The heroes then discover the horrible truth. Glorio and his entire family have been rakshasas for decades. Even after this discovery, the heroes continue their navigation, and they eventually succeed in rescuing both Vencarlo Orsini and Neolandus Calipopoulos. Before they make their escape, the heroes return to the mansion and put an end to Glorio, making off with some of his most valuable treasures and leaving his criminal empire in ruins. The heroes gather up Vencarlo and Neolandus, then hop into a smuggling ship in a hidden coastal cave beneath the Arcona Palace. They sail their ship north along the coastline until they're clear of Korvosa's immediate influence. Then they disembark. Vencarlo emphasizes the importance of needing a place to regroup and recover from their ordeal, and he directs the group toward Hars, where an old friend will provide them with protection. When the heroes discreetly confront him about his identity as Blackjack, he makes only a token denial, before coming clean and claiming that, had it not been for Ileosa's descent into villainy, he would have hung up the hood and cloak long ago. On the way to Hars, the heroes have the opportunity to hear what Neolandus Calipopoulos knows about the goings-on in Castle Korvosa, and what they learn is so much worse than they could have imagined. Ileosa's Story, Part 1. By 4708 AR, 4 years into her marriage, Queen Ileosa was growing increasingly bored with her new life. King Eodred was unwilling to cede any meaningful power to her, and the other authorities within the city had no interest in sharing power with the unpopular queen. Her life became limited to exploring the palace's many nooks and crannies. These explorations eventually took her into the bowels of the structure, the upper rooms of the Black Pyramid, which had become the palace treasury. Normally, these rooms were locked, and the key was under the protection of the seneschal. But Neolandus determined that the treasury was largely safe from Ileosa's meddling, especially since he would know immediately if she took anything of any real value. So he allowed her to steal the key on occasion and made no issue of it, believing that it kept her from making a nuisance of herself in Korvosan politics. This, unfortunately, would prove to be a mistake. Within the treasury, the Arabasti family held all of their gathered wealth, as well as the many artifacts and treasures which they had accumulated since Korvosa's founding. Among these were several ancient artifacts which the Shoanti had once hidden within the Black Pyramid. These had been claimed by Korvosa when the colonizers drove the Shoanti out of the region, and were by that time considered part of the royal treasures. And so it was that Ileosa came into contact with Midnight's teeth. Among the many treasures seized from the Shoanti were a set of 7 large pointed teeth in a black case. These were collectively known as Midnight's teeth, and warnings about the teeth had been written in the Shoanti language upon the treasury walls, but they were generally disregarded as native superstition by the invading Korvosan settlers. These warnings, however, were tremendously prescient, for the teeth hid within them an innate wickedness and a font of tremendous arcane power. So long as the teeth remained isolated, their power remained inert. But they yearned for a mortal vessel which they could infect, and in the young and ambitious Ileosa, they found their ideal target. As soon as Ileosa's fingers touched Midnight's teeth, the malevolent spirit within them latched on to the young queen, and infused her with its power, its courage, and most dangerously, its cunning. Though Ileosa remained in control of her body, her soul had been permanently altered. She emerged from the treasure chambers a changed woman, one of unparalleled wickedness and unbridled ambition. She sought immediately to lay the groundwork for her rise to power. She knew she would need a loyal protector, and promoted the warrior Sabina Marin to be her personal bodyguard. Sabina had joined the royal guard in the past year and was a tremendously skilled warrior. More importantly, Ileosa had noticed that Sabina's dedication to her had been more than purely platonic or professional. Once Sabina had been promoted, Ileosa seduced and ensnared the young swordswoman, ensuring that Sabina would remain loyal and blind to Ileosa's faults. Separately, Ileosa reached out to the Red Mantis assassins of far-off Mediogalti Isle. She initially hoped they might assassinate her husband, and was frustrated when they explained their rules against murdering monarchs. They did, however, offer to provide her with poisons or other tools to enable her to perform the assassination herself, and one of their offered tools, a poison called Fool's Leprosy, piqued her interest. The poison replicated the symptoms of a sudden onset leprosy, making it difficult to fight with magic or traditional medicine. To administer the poison, Ileosa chose Venster Arabasti, King Eodred's secret Nephilim brother. Ileosa used her looks and guile to win over Venster's loyalty, playing upon his jealousy and loneliness. Venster had a standing card game with Eodred several times a week, and Ileosa convinced him to cover the cards in the poison which the Red Mantis provided. Eodred was a notorious nail-biter, and ingested the poison even as his brother remained unaffected. Eodred died of his poisoning soon after, leaving Ileosa as his only heir. Before her opponents could find their footing, she pushed her claim and made her move. She unleashed the Red Mantis assassins upon Korvosa, pointing them at her most politically powerful rival, Neolandus Calipopoulos, the seneschal of Castle Korvosa. Neolandus only managed to escape the Red Mantis through pure luck, though he quickly put two and two together and figured out some of Ileosa's corruption and the evils she had undertaken to seize power. Book 4: A History of Ashes. The heroes arrive at the Blackbird Ranch outside of Hars, well beyond the reach of Ileosa and her minions, at least for a time. They make contact with Vencarlo's old friends in the town, as well as Trinia Sabor, the young bard they helped escape the city several months prior. Over the next few days, Neolandus brings everyone up to speed on his suspicions about Queen Ileosa and the corrupting influence of Midnight's teeth. While he doesn't know the origins of the artifacts, he does know who might be able to shed some light on the subject: the Shoanti. The Shoanti peoples, who once occupied the lowlands around Korvosa, were driven away over centuries of occupation and colonization, and now live a harsh existence in the Cinderlands of the Storval Plateau. The heroes, as it turns out, have a potential in with the Shoanti, as the shaman Thousand Bones likely remains grateful to them for having recovered the remains of his son several months back. With this connection, Neolandus thinks the heroes might be the best hope of unraveling the mystery of Midnight's teeth, and learning how to undo their influence. So, with this bare framework of a plan, the heroes set out. They pass through the city of Kermaga without issue, then enter the Cinderlands, a harsh wilderness with scorchingly hot days, freezing cold nights, and filled with all manner of fearsome creatures. The heroes first move west toward the Callow Mounds, the traditional home of the Skoan-Kwa, the tribe to which Thousand Bones belongs. The Skoan-Kwa are the keepers of the dead among the Shoanti of the Storval Plateau, and the Callow Mounds is the site where the dead are laid to rest. Even as they make this first incursion into the Cinderlands, the heroes are reminded of the hostility with which they might be greeted. They pass a pile of stones with a wooden spike driven into them, upon which is impaled a severed Shoanti head. The head has been further desecrated by a pair of red crossbow bolts driven into the eye sockets. Even in this wilderness, the Shoanti are not free from the invaders who stole their land. Arriving at the Callow Mounds, the heroes are stopped by a patrol of Skoan-Kwa bone slayers, warriors trained to quell the unquiet dead who have possibly the best artwork in the entire book, and that's saying something. The situation is diffused when Thousand Bones arrives and speaks for the heroes, granting them access to the camp. Thousand Bones greets the heroes warmly, thanking them once again for returning his son's remains. He listens intently as the heroes explain the information they are seeking, then gives a careful answer. He explains that the Skoan-Kwa no longer remember the legends of Midnight's Teeth, but that another tribe, the Sklar-Kwa, might. Where the Skoan-Kwa, the Skull Clan, are the keepers of the dead, the Sklar-Kwa, the Sun Clan, are warriors, famed for their bravery and battle prowess, and their Sun Shamans are the finest history keepers in the Cinderlands. The Sklar-Kwa, however, are extremely insular, even among the Shoan-Ti. They will never pass a story along to a Chemek, an outsider. As if to emphasize Thousand Bones' point, the meeting is interrupted by the sudden arrival of a Sklar-Kwa warrior, a local hero named Krojan Eats What He Kills. Krojan is outraged by the presence of Chemek at the Callow Mounds, and immediately challenges them to a contest of strength. Though Thousand Bones diffuses the tension and sends Krojan on his way, the warrior resolves to keep an eye on the heroes. From here, the heroes lay out a broad goal: to earn the respect of the Sklar-Kwa by performing various acts of heroism and bravery around the Cinderlands. They are accompanied in these efforts by a small group of bone slayers to act as witnesses. During these missions, the heroes learn that the severed Shoan-Ti head they saw earlier was a trophy left behind by a warrior known only as the Cinderlander, a frontiersman who hunts the Shoan-Ti with unbridled fervor. The heroes also learn more of the tribal dynamics, as Krojan follows them openly with a group of young warriors at his back as he attempts to put them through some of the same challenges as the heroes, to turn them into proper Sklar-Kwa burn riders. During these trials, the heroes investigate an abandoned Thessalonian ruin, during which they are suddenly attacked by a squad of Red Mantis assassins. The heroes manage to dispatch the assassins in short order, saving several of Krojan's followers in the process. Though they survive this encounter with relative ease, the origins of the assassins remain unknown. From here, they travel west, where they contact the Lyrun-Kwa, the Moon Clan. They help a group of Moon Maiden warriors drive a Red Reaver out of a sacred pilgrimage site, earning the respect of a Lyrun-Kwa truth speaker. The most impressive, and fun if I'm being honest, of these challenges is certainly when the heroes choose to reenact a Shoan-Ti legend about the warrior Kurak, who was cast out of his tribe and was reborn in the stomach of the monster Cindermaw, allowing him to return to his people. To replicate this, the heroes enter the hunting grounds of the monstrous Cindermaw, an immense fire-infused worm. They offer themselves up, allowing Cindermaw to swallow them, then cut their way out of his stomach. Or, if you're my players, you simply activate your figurine of wondrous power and ride an enormous jade elephant named Rumble out of the Cindermaw's mouth as the beast throws you up. Long story short, it was pretty awesome. After performing these trials, the heroes travel with their Bone Slayer companions to Flameford, the major Sklar-Kwa settlement in the Cinderlands. Approaching the camp, the heroes are stopped, but are ushered to the Sun Shaman when they explain their goal and the progress they've made. The Sun Shaman gives them a final test called the Trial of the Totem, an endurance challenge in the hot sun of the Cinderlands. The heroes succeed, and are finally able to shed the title of Chemek. The timing of this acceptance is fortuitous, for that night, Flameford comes under attack. A squad of Red Mantis assassins drop into the camp, having been carried by a small army of gargoyle allies. With them is the Cinderlander, who's been acting as their guide as they've pursued the heroes. These forces assault Flameford, attacking not only the heroes, but the Sklar-Kwa as well, warriors and bystanders alike. The heroes join forces with Krojan, who witnessed their trial of the totem and successfully kill the assassins and the Cinderlander. Krojan finally accepts the heroes as his friends and allies, and all of Flameford celebrates their grand victory. The next morning, the Sun Shaman presents the heroes with the information they seek. Centuries ago, a Scarwall champion named Koja Eyes Aflame received a request for aid from a group of heroes far to the west. Koja was an accomplished warrior, and an even more accomplished shaman, and when the heroes from far-off Ustalav requested his aid, he knew the urgency in their call must be answered. He joined a warrior named Mandravus and a band of other adventurers in Belkzen, the land of the orcs who had so often threatened Koja's people. Mandravus had assembled his band to counter the threat of Kazavon, an infamous draconic warlord who ruled western Belkzen and who threatened much of central Avestan. Koja Eyes Aflame joined Mandravus and his allies in defeating Kazavon, but the battle was terrible, and when Koja returned to his people, he was plagued by nightmares and stalked by horrors at the edges of his vision. He brought with him a set of 7 draconic teeth, the Fangs of Kazavon. Koja explained to his fellows that these fangs still bore some of Kazavon's lingering malevolence, and they were functionally indestructible. It was his responsibility to hide the fangs, so they might never be used to unleash Kazavon's influence upon the world once again. Koja and his Scarwall brethren took the Fangs of Kazavon, which they renamed Midnight's Teeth to add a layer of obscurity, to the ancient Black Pyramid on the coast, which had once belonged to the ancient wizard kings, the Rune Lords, who had ruled over the Shoanti in ancient times. They hid the teeth among the upper layers of the pyramid, then marked them with warning signs. There the teeth remained undisturbed for centuries, as the tale of Koja and his allies faded into obscurity. Then the Chalaxian colonizers came, and drove the Shoanti back to the Cinderlands. Korvosa was established around the base of the Black Pyramid, and Castle Korvosa was built atop it. The Sun Shamans of the Scarwall had little choice but to watch with anticipatory dread, waiting for the day when the invaders would stumble upon Midnight's Teeth and unleash the wickedness of Kazavon upon the world once again. At the conclusion of his story, the Sun Shaman assesses what the heroes have told him about Queen Ileosa. He believes that the Fangs of Kazavon have infused Ileosa with the warlord's wickedness. He speculates that Ileosa's new 7-pointed crown likely incorporates the 7 fangs of the mighty dragon warlord. The heroes later confirm this, dubbing the artifact the Crown of Fangs. The Sun Shaman then gives the heroes some much-needed guidance. When Koja Eyes Aflame returned to the Scarwall, he informed them that his ally, Mandravus, had remained behind in Kazavon's fortress, Castle Scarwall. If anyone still has the tools to counter the power of the Crown of Fangs, it would be Mandravus, or one of his followers or descendants. The search for a weapon against Ileosa must begin at Castle Scarwall. Then the Sun Shaman makes an offer. He will call upon the power of his ancestors to bless the heroes so they might finish the quest which Koja began. At this point, Zilara manifests from her Harrow deck and offers to combine her own powers with the Sun Shaman's ritual. Her people, the native Verisians, are in just as much danger as the Shoanti, and the Sun Shaman agrees to her participation. Together, they produce a spirit song, infusing the heroes with protective magics for the journey ahead. The song also gives the heroes a name which they will need to seek: Sarithtial, the Sword of Mandravus. But before the heroes can act on this new information and set out for Castle Scarwall, they receive an urgent message via magic. In response, they return to Korvosa using magical travel. Back in Korvosa, tensions have continued to escalate. On Ileosa's orders, the Grey Maidens have established martial law across the whole city. The crown has levied a series of high taxes, impoverishing even middle-class families. Those who can't pay are being arrested, and slave labor has been established as an acceptable form of payment. The Grey Maidens are now openly kidnapping women from all walks of life to increase their numbers, and families are being torn apart as their daughters, wives, sisters, and mothers are stolen away. The Red Mantis have made enough public assassinations that their name is on everyone's lips, and rumors swirl that they work directly with Ileosa, acting as her subtle knife when the blunt instrument of the maidens is insufficient. Into all of this walk the heroes, who quickly reconnect with Cressida Croft. Croft has gone from field marshal to rebel leader, and has partnered with the Church of Pharasma under Bishop Capira de Bear. Their fledgling rebellion has set up shop in the Grey District, the graveyard quarter on the southern end of the city. The remaining churches have either aligned with the Queen, in the case of Asmodeus and Abadar, or have chosen to remain neutral due to lack of military might, in the case of Sarenrae and Shellen. Croft explains the current situation, firmly establishing that the Grey Maidens and the Red Mantis are the power in the city, and unless they are driven back, the rebellion will never gain steam. Luckily, an opportunity has come to light. Croft brings forward an agent of the Cerulean Society, the Korvosan Thieves Guild, who explains that the Maidens, and likely the Mantis, are operating out of the Longacre Building, a former prison. The Cerulean Society has long had access to the bowels of the prison via a back door, and is willing to grant access to the heroes so they can deal a blow to the Maidens' base of power. Supposedly, the Maidens hold prisoners within the building as well, and recent intel suggests that Marcus Endrin, the former leader of the Sable Company, might be held there as well, having been magically healed from the injuries the Queen caused. Croft asks the heroes to storm the Longacre Building and free Endrin, so he might rally more warriors to her cause. At the same time, any disturbances the heroes could cause to the operation of the Maidens at the site would go a long way toward helping the rebellion gain ground. The heroes agree. The Korvosan heroes travel through the city sewers until they reach the entrance to the Death Head Vaults, the secret pre-colonization chambers beneath the Longacre Building, which the Cerulean Society has used as a smuggling route. Within the vault, the heroes almost immediately stumble upon a makeshift temple to Achekik, the Mantis god, which is serving as the base of operations for a large contingent of Red Mantis assassins. The fighting within the temple is fierce, and the heroes succeed in killing the local Red Mantis leadership, including a field commander and a priestess of Achekik. The heroes find no proof tying the Red Mantis to Ileosa directly, but their presence in the vault speaks volumes. As the heroes enter the Longacre Building basement, they make a series of increasingly disturbing discoveries. First, they locate several torture chambers, some of which are still occupied. The vast majority of the victims are young women, and the heroes piece together that these are kidnapped potential recruits for the Grey Maidens. Tellingly, these torture chambers are being administered by Grey Maiden officers. Next, the heroes locate a series of records detailing the names of each woman taken by the Grey Maidens, as well as the fate of each. These records, in conjunction with the rescued torture victims, paint a grisly picture. Recruitment into the Grey Maidens is, apparently, a grueling process, defined by torture and mental conditioning. And those who prove resistant, or who break their conditioning in the field, are sent through the process again and again, until their bodies finally give out. Incensed at these discoveries, the heroes push further into the Longacre Building. They deal a major blow to the Grey Maidens when they sever their leadership structure, killing not only the Order's second-in-command, a human named Corditra, but also its third-in-command and enforcer, an elf woman named Tisharue. The heroes then make their escape, freeing Marcus Endrin from his prison cell and escorting him and the kidnapped Grey Maiden recruits to the relative safety of the Grey Quarter. With this assault, the Grey Maidens are driven out of the Longacre Building entirely. They retreat to Castle Korvosa to reinforce their defenses, and Ileosa is forced to relax martial law in the city. The heroes then report their findings from the Cinderlands to Field Marshal Croft. While she and her allies remain in the Grey Quarter and build up their rebel forces, the heroes will travel to Castle Scarwall, in the hopes of discovering some means of destroying the Crown of Fangs. Ileosa's Story, Part 2. After Ileosa drove Seneschal Neolandus Calipopoulos from the palace, she was free to begin consolidating her power over Korvosa. She began the formation of the Grey Maidens, a new military order loyal only to the throne. She placed Sabina Marin, her lover and bodyguard, in direct command, then began recruiting soldiers from the Hell Knights, the Sable Company, and the Korvosan Guard, as well as the Church of Asmodeus. Recruits were universally women, and because Ileosa was deeply racist, were almost exclusively humans of Chelish descent or elves. Notably, all recruits had to meet a certain standard of beauty set by Ileosa herself, for she wanted only the most beautiful women to serve her. Of course, the magic-infused Ileosa would never be satisfied with soldiers controlled through mere patriotism or a steady paycheck. So she requisitioned the Longacre building and sent her new recruits there for outfitting. The outfitting process was, in actuality, a magical conditioning process designed to ensure absolute loyalty in the victims. Ileosa outsourced this conditioning to the enchantress Vavana Daughtry, who worked with extraplanar allies to refine and perfect the process. The conditioning combined physical torture with mental manipulation, culminating with ritual facial scarification intended to ensure that each maiden's beauty would be forever marred by Ileosa's influence. Only Sabina Marin escaped this conditioning, with Ileosa convinced of the power of her personal magnetism to keep her bodyguard in line. Immediately after the Grey Maidens began spinning up as an organization, Ileosa reached out again to the Red Mantis assassins. She hired them as her personal assassination squad, effectively putting them on retainer. The Red Mantis took so many jobs from her that they eventually sent an entire contingent to set up shop in the city, which Ileosa also set up in the Longacre building. With these two enforcement mechanisms, the Grey Maidens and the Red Mantis, in place, Ileosa moved on to the next phase of her plan. She might have the tools to control Korvosa militarily, but it would never truly be her city while so many undesirables called it home. Too many Korvosans were unfit to serve their queen. The poor, the Varisians, the Shoanti, all of them disgusted Ileosa. The Grey Maidens, even after a decade of recruitment and establishment, would never have the manpower to purge Korvosa of its lower classes, but the Red Mantis, upon hearing of Ileosa's goals, proposed a novel solution. They provided Ileosa with a sample of Voral's phage, a fungus-based magical disease which ties back to a minor plot point in Rise of the Rune Lords. To weaponize the disease, the Red Mantis put Ileosa in contact with two subject matter experts, the Chelish poisoner Reiner Devalis and the Urgathoan cult leader Lady Andaizen. Ileosa coordinated all these efforts with the funds from her vast treasury, directing the development of the Bloodveil Plague to purge her city of those she deemed unworthy. Bloodveil was first introduced to the city through the use of infected coins. These coins were cast onto the streets of the poorest districts of the city, ensuring that beggars and urchins would be the first to be infected and killed. Additionally, large quantities of the infected coins were deposited into Abadarian banks, ensuring that the largest church in the city, the largest organization of medical experts, would be overwhelmed with disease and infection. Finally, the Direption, the false plague ship, was brought in as a distraction. It sailed up the Jaguar River flying a yellow light to ensure that it would be sunk, successfully acting as a scapegoat and directing suspicions about Bloodveil's origins away from Reiner Devalis for precious weeks. With her army in place and her plague beginning to spread, Ileosa set herself to the task of crafting an artifact which could contain the Fangs of Khazavon and imbue her with even greater power, the Crown of Fangs. All of this activity drew the attention of Togamor, an accomplished bloat mage in Kaer Maga. He offered his services to Ileosa, and she quickly accepted. What Ileosa didn't know at the time was that Togamor was actually just a puppet. His master, the Beliar devil Sirmignato, saw in Ileosa much potential which he intended to cultivate. Book 5, Skeletons of Scarwall. Before the Korvosan heroes can begin their journey to Castle Scarwall, they receive a magical communication from none other than Lauri Vaus, the Kuthanite priestess who helped them in Old Korvosa. She requests a meet-up with the heroes, and they agree, meeting her in the city of Kaer Maga, far away from Ileosa's prying eyes. Lauri arrives and introduces the heroes to her traveling companion, a dour summoner named Shadow Count Sial, along with his chiton Eidolon. Lauri then comes clean about her true purpose for having been in Old Korvosa several weeks ago. Lauri and Sial are members of a secret society in Nidal, the Brotherhood of Bones. The Brotherhood is dedicated to the protection of Nidal and its standing in the Inner Sea region. One of their many primary missions relates to the draconic warlord Khazavon. During the reign of Khazavon, the Church of Zon-Kuthon took much of the blame for the warlord's activities, even though he was operating independently. When Kazavon was killed, Nidal's reputation on the world stage actually improved substantially, as the nation no longer had to take blame for the actions of what many considered to be a rogue Nidalese agent. Now, the Brotherhood of Bones wants to ensure that Kazavon is never allowed to return, for fear of the chaos and unchecked evil he might unleash upon the world, crimes for which Nidal and the ruling Black Triune might be forced to answer. Lowry had originally come to Korvosa seeking Lady Andaizen, intending to bring her to justice for the crimes she'd committed in Nidal. Once in the city, however, Lowry became aware of Kazavon's influence on several local artists. Though most of them had died in the chaos of Ileosa's rise to power, she found Salvatore's home, and confirmed that the blue dragon who appeared in several of his paintings was indeed Kazavon. That had been her ulterior motive in aiding the heroes when they rescued Salvatore. Since then, she'd reached out to Shadow Count Sial to decide what their next steps should be. After that, Lowry proposes an alliance. She and Shadow Count Sial, her superior officer, will accompany the heroes to Castle Scarwall. They will aid in the exploration of the castle, as well as the finding and claiming of Serithtial, all so the heroes can succeed in striking down Ileosa. In payment, they ask only for the Fangs of Kazavon, so the Brotherhood might seal them away in a secured Nidalese vault, where they will never again be put to use. Lowry points out that she and Sial know the exact location of Castle Scarwall, allowing the heroes to travel there directly via magic, without having to explore the broader region. And she further reminds the heroes that many of the evils still infesting Scarwall will remain loyal to Zon Kuthan, and might allow Kuthanite priests and their allies to pass unmolested. Sial himself informs the heroes that, for the time being at least, he and Lowry can be trusted, because they are incapable of retrieving, carrying, or wielding Serithtial on their own. The blade was blessed by Iomade herself, specifically to strike down followers of Zon Kuthan, preventing any of the Brotherhood's members from retrieving it without outside help. After some deliberation, the heroes accept Lowry's offer, and the group then travels via magic to Castle Scarwall, deep in the hold of Belkzen. Castle Scarwall is a highly defensible fortress, a castle constructed on an island in the middle of a dormant volcanic lake. A single bridge connects the castle to the mainland, guarded by a crumbling stone barbican. The castle itself is in far better shape, preserved by the ancient magics and haunts infesting the structure. The architecture is a multi-layered mess of soaring towers and sweeping halls. At the back of the castle stands an even more ancient construction, a pale stone tower of incredible height, one of the ancient star towers of Dobral, before his corruption and transformation into Zon Kuthan. Castle Scarwall is an absolutely enormous dungeon, taking up the entirety of Book 5 of this adventure path. The castle is split across 5 major maps, each one lovingly detailed with numerous rooms full of traps, hazards, and enemy encounters. At my table, this dungeon alone took over 30 hours to complete, and we were moving crazy fast. It was a blast from start to finish. Scarwall is defined in large part by its curse. The souls of the many victims whom Kazavon tortured and killed in his day imbue the whole fortress with malevolent necromantic energy, providing a number of lingering curse effects with which the heroes must contend throughout their exploration. Spells like Detect Evil or Detect Undead have a chance of driving their caster mad, while phantasms and lesser spirits plague the heroes at every step, lingering at the edges of their vision. Anyone who dies in the castle becomes the victim of a soul trap by the spirits within, and the whole structure is under the constant effects of an Unhallow spell. As the heroes enter the castle, they are met with an unwelcome surprise. Zelara, their spirit companion for many months, is drawn out of her harrow deck, and her soul is claimed by the spirits of the castle. She's dragged, screaming, into the walls themselves. The source of this effect is the chained spirit Mithradar, the undead remnant of Kazavon's former second-in-command. For centuries now, he has been the unquestioned master of Scarwall. As a chained spirit, he possesses the unique ability to create 4 soul anchors scattered about the castle. These soul anchors are other evil creatures onto which Mithradar has grafted part of his soul, allowing him to spread his essence all across the castle and empower the spirits and haunts in an area. This also allows him to draw power from the anchors themselves, making him functionally unkillable so long as his anchors exist. Because Mithradar is the focal point of the curses affecting the castle, the soul anchors also empower those curses. Thus, the heroes are presented with a secondary goal as they explore the castle: find the 4 spirit anchors and destroy them. Each destroyed anchor will weaken Mithradar, reducing the effects of his curses and eventually allowing the heroes to take him down. The spirit anchors themselves are fantastically fun mini-bosses: Bel Shalom, an umbral dragon; Castothrain, a skeletal warrior; Nihil the Ashbringer, an Ashmade devil; and Zevravenka, a demi-lich. Each anchor has their own little backstory relating to Kazavon, or how they became trapped in the castle after his death. And so, the heroes begin their exploration of Castle Scarwall, pursuing the spirit anchors so they might lift the Scarwall curse and free Zalara. All the while, they encounter haunts and ghosts who provide them with information on the castle's history, allowing them to piece together the sordid tale of the warlord Kazavon and the tragic hero Mandravis. In the late 4030s and early 4040s AR, meaning about 700 years before the time of the campaign, the peoples of Ustalav were in danger. With Tar-Baphon having been overthrown only 2 centuries before, Ustalav as a nation was still on incredibly unsteady footing. The western county of Tamravena, an archaic name for the modern county of Canterwall, was especially vulnerable. The orcs of Belkzen had become increasingly active and aggressive in Tar-Baphon's absence, and Count Andachi, the current ruler, did not have the military skill to protect his people. As the Count's desperation grew, he began to turn to darker and darker forces for aid, and in 4042 he finally took a dangerous and unrecoverable step. He offered prayers to Zon Kuthon, god of pain, torture, and darkness, begging for protection for his people. And the Midnight Lord, in his wickedness, responded. That very year, the human mercenary Kazavon, a servant of Zon Kuthon, arrived in Tamravena. Count Andachi appointed Kazavon as his military leader, and the warrior soon had the county's armies reorganized and ready for war. Kazavon led his forces against the Belkzen orcs, and over the course of a year drove them back into Belkzen. Kazavon was so successful that he forced the Belkzen orcs to retreat all the way to the Kodor Mountains, on the western border of Belkzen, allowing the Kuthonite general to seize massive swaths of territory. Rather than retreat, however, Kazavon saw fit to set up shop in Belkzen, constructing an enormous fortress called Castle Scarwall about the base of one of Zon Kuthon's star towers. His armies, now largely loyal to him personally rather than Tamravena, remained under his command, even as the supposedly defensive campaign came to an end. At first, the nature of Kazavon's betrayal was not understood. This changed, however, when a delegation from Lastwall, longtime enemies of the Belkzen orcs, arrived at Castle Scarwall to offer their congratulations. Kazavon, in the first open display of his vile nature, captured and tortured these diplomats, eventually flaying their skin and displaying it above the tower of his fortress. News of this cruelty soon made its way to Tamravena, where Count Andachi heard it and was horrified. He realized only too late that Kazavon's motivations were not so benign. Having unleashed this horror upon the world, Count Andachi took it upon himself to correct the mistake. He raised a new army, and in 4051 AR, he and his forces marched into Belkzen. Kazavon, though, met Andachi in the field with his own forces, and crushed the Count. Andachi was taken prisoner and hauled back to Castle Scarwall to be tortured and killed, while his commanders were impaled upon a thorn tree and left to bleed out. This event became known as the Battle of the Screaming Tree. From that point on, Kazavon was universally acknowledged as a warlord. From Castle Scarwall, he subjugated the peoples of Belkzen and the surrounding nations, including Ustalav, Lastwall, and the Storval Plateau. For a decade, the forces of several nations attempted to oust the warlord from power, but none of them ever succeeded in overcoming his incredible tactical genius. Thousands died at Kazavon's hands. Finally, in 4063 AR, a band of heroes rose up to the challenge. The champion Mandravus, fed up at the warlord's cruelty, resolved himself to put an end to the threat once and for all. He took up the blade Sarithtial, which had been wielded by his own grandfather in multiple wars against Nidal, the nation bound to the faith of Zon Kuthon. The blade had supposedly been forged by Iomade herself, and was imbued with an innate intellect obsessed with the opposition to Kuthonite servants. Armed with this sword, Mandravus reached out through his connections in the esoteric order of the Palatine Eye, the fledgling secret society of which he was a member. He assembled a group of adventurers from all across the Inner Sea region, including Koja Eyes Aflame from the Skalar Qua. Then they secretly traveled to Castle Scarwall. These warriors made contact with a traitor in Kazavon's court, the chamberlain Cleestad, who gave them access to a secret entrance to the castle. Mandravus and his companions stormed the castle and attacked Kazavon directly, but there they met with a new and terrible revelation. Kazavon was not a mortal man. Surrounded by his enemies, the warlord finally revealed his true nature. Kazavon was, in truth, a great Wyrm blue dragon, though in the modern rule set he would probably be classified as a Stormcrown archdragon. Faced with this unexpected horror, Mandravus and his companions rallied. They fought and defeated Kazavon, scattering his forces from Castle Scarwall. The heroes set about burning Kazavon's corpse to scour his evil from the land once and for all. In this effort, however, they were met with a new challenge. Kazavon was so infused with power and malice that even his corpse resisted total annihilation. Several elements of his body proved resistant to the hero's attempts at destruction: the skull, claws, horns, tailbones, wings, ribs, and fangs. These remaining fragments were connected to Kazavon's unquiet soul, and Mandravus understood that if they were ever reunited, they would provide a means by which the dragon might revive himself. Shaken by this realization, and unable to destroy these powerful artifacts, Mandravus and his champions made a plan. Each of the companions would take up one of the relics of Kazavon, then carry it to some far-off corner of the world and hide it, so the full set might never be found and reassembled. As Mandravus watched his 6 companions depart from the castle Scarwall, he elected to remain behind, in an attempt to purge the structure of any lingering evil. His occupation of the castle, however, was short. The orcs of Belkzen, hearing that their enemy Kazavon was slain, sought to ransack his fortress. They assaulted Castle Scarwall, and during the attack, Mandravus was slain. It wasn't long, though, before the orcs too were driven out of the castle, as Zon Kuthon's influence, as well as the lingering wickedness of the souls who'd been tortured within the castle's walls, manifested as shades, ghosts, and all manner of dangerous undead. With the departure of the orcs, Cleestad, the treacherous chamberlain who had allowed Mandravus and his allies into the palace, emerged from his hiding place in the dark corners of Castle Scarwall. He found the corpse of Mandravus, the blade Sarithtial still gripped tightly in its hand. In triumph, Cleestad took up Sarithtial. In this, though, he made a mistake. Zon Kuthon, infuriated about the death of Kazavon, looked upon the traitor with scorn, and declared that he should crawl upon the earth like the worm he was. And so Cleestad was cursed, transformed into a worm-like monster. With Sarithtial in hand, he fled the Midnight Lord's judgment, escaping into the Star Tower, and following it all the way down into the bowels of Golarion. None of this was known to Mandravus's companions, who scattered all across Avestan and beyond. One of these warriors, the Shoanti shaman Koja Eyes Aflame, bore the fangs of Kazavon back to his homeland, where he and his fellows eventually hid them among the chambers at the top of the ancient Black Pyramid. The heroes learn all of this as they explore Castle Scarwall, and they meet many of the major players in the story. Most importantly, they discover the ghosts of both Count Andachi and Mandravus himself, and in lifting the curse on the castle, they end the suffering of these 2 tragic characters. There's one more encounter I need to discuss, not because it is relevant to the plot, just because it's so cool. The Dance Macabre. When the heroes enter the ballroom on the western end of the castle, they're met by the sound of haunting music. Spectral figures begin dancing around them, and they're compelled to take up the dance. At the center of the dance floor is a reaper-like hooded figure who seeks to cut down the heroes, down, and the only way to approach and fight is to weave through the dancers. Paizo designed this fight with a specific soundtrack in mind, the Danse Macabre by French composer Camille Saint-Saëns. Apologies for my horrible French pronunciation. With this piece of music as accompaniment, this is probably the most memorable encounter in the entire dungeon. After a long series of fights over several days of exploration, the heroes finally succeed in defeating the chained spirit Mithradar once and for all. The curse of Castle Scarwall is lifted, and Zalara reunites with her companions. From there, the heroes and their allies follow the trail of Cleestad, the cursed former chamberlain, into the Star Tower. They move downward through the tower, all the way into the Darklands, where they find a subterranean chamber. There, they finally lay eyes on their prize, Serithtial, the Sword of Mandravis, blessed by Iomade herself. It is guarded by the now monstrous Cleestad, who has glutted himself on the denizens of the Darklands. The heroes slay the traitor, bringing an end to his suffering, then claim Serithtial for themselves. Finally equipped with a weapon capable of killing Ileosa and destroying the mighty crown of Fangs, the heroes leave Scarwall, with Lowry and possibly Cial in tow, assuming they survived the dungeon. The group teleports back to Korvosa, ready to take the fight to the Queen. The plots and schemes which await them, however, are far more twisted than they could have predicted. Book 6. Crown of Fangs. When the heroes return to Korvosa, they find a city on the brink of complete collapse. While the Grey Maidens no longer patrol the streets with regularity, their remaining patrols outside the palace are incredibly violent. Huge numbers of citizens have been enslaved and put to the task of erecting statues of Ileosa and monuments to her glory. A black dragon has been sighted over the city several times, even circling the palace, though no one knows when it will decide to strike. Some claim that the beast might even have made an alliance with the Queen. Rumors swirl about devils which stalk the skies and streets in Ileosa's service, hunting those who voice their dissent. As the heroes approach the city, Zalara provides one final harrowing. Her portents paint a grim picture yet again. A people oppressed and downtrodden, a rebellion in need of aid, and the specter of death looming over the city, ready to cut down huge swaths of the populace at a moment's notice. Zalara speaks of castles and pyramids, 2 of each, of battles won, battles lost, and battles yet to be decided. One image pervades her vision: blood. Blood ancient and blood new, mixing together for a sinister and unknown purpose. Though the past and future are muddled, and the threads of fate thoroughly entangled, one thing remains clear: the trials ahead will push the heroes to their limits and beyond. The heroes enter the Grey District and link up with the rebellion. Cressida Croft and Bishop de Bear have been joined by other major figures. Vencarlo Orsini, Neolandus Calipopoulos, and Trinia Sabor have returned from Blackbird Ranch, and Thousand Bones and Krojan Eats What He Kills have brought a small band of Shoanti warriors back to the city to aid in the fighting. Croft has cooked up a plan to gather more support from the citizens. If she can reveal that Neolandus is still alive and get his story out to the people, it will give the Abadarian Church and the remaining noble families a legal means to support the rebellion. To accomplish this, she needs the heroes to cut off the enforcers Ileosa uses to maintain control in her city, for fear that they might simply corner Neolandus and kill him outright when he reveals himself. The first of these is Sabina Marin, who still leads the Grey Maidens. Another target might be Togomor, the bloat mage acting as Ileosa's replacement seneschal. The dragon in the skies is of concern as well. If he is allied with Ileosa, as many suspect, the rebellion won't be able to act openly so long as he can shower them with acid from the skies. Also, a new agent of the Queen, Trifaccia, has begun targeting suspected rebel activity, though none of his targets have been legitimate rebels as far as Croft can tell. This Trifaccia seems to be making a play for Blackjack's status as Korvosa's masked vigilante, but Croft suspects that his heroics are just staged theatrics. Once these enforcers have been dealt with, the rebels will be free to gather support and spread Neolandis' story to the masses. The heroes first plan to deal with Trifaccia. They meet in private with Vencarlo and convince him to take up the hood of Blackjack once more. If Blackjack can defeat Trifaccia and ideally expose a direct connection between him and the Queen, it will serve as a major victory for the rebels in the court of public opinion. The heroes accompany Blackjack into central Korvosa, making a show of waltzing down major streets unopposed. Soon they are surrounded by a gang of thugs, threatening them with weapons. When the heroes drive the thugs away, a man in a flamboyant brass mask and a flowing red cape appears. The self-styled hero, Trifaccia. Trifaccia makes a big show of declaring himself the true hero of Korvosa, and states that law and order were restored soon after the heroes vacated the city. He declares his loyalty to the Queen, who brings stability and peace, then challenges the heroes to a duel. Blackjack steps forward, discreetly buffed by the hero's spells, and accepts Trifaccia's challenge. The two swordsmen duel, and while the aging Vencarlo is outmatched, he does manage to force Trifaccia to fall back on his magical powers, revealing his true identity as an Ifrit, a genie from the elemental plane of fire who is bound to Ileosa's service. The genie attempts to escape back to Castle Korvosa, but the heroes surround and kill him, unmasking him before a crowd of onlookers. Blackjack stands victorious, and Vencarlo declares that it is well past time for him to put away the cloak and hood. He even offers it to the heroes, stating plainly that, once the rebellion is over, one of them would certainly make for a worthy successor. There's little time to celebrate, however, for within moments a roar erupts from the skies overhead. Vencarlo makes his escape as the heroes turn to face an old black dragon, likely an ancient bog dragon in the modern rule set, which descends from the cloud cover. Upon its back rides Sabina Marin, commander of the Grey Maidens and personal bodyguard to the Queen. Sabina and the dragon Zarmangaroth attack immediately, and the heroes are hard-pressed to defend themselves. As the fight drags on, however, it becomes apparent that the dragon and his rider do not know how to work together. Sabina's commands regularly throw Zarmangaroth off balance, and he soon grows so irritated that he throws her from the saddle. Then, unexpectedly, Sabina rises to her feet and turns on the dragon, calling on the heroes for aid. She fights desperately, declaring that it's only a matter of time before Zarmangaroth turns his wrath upon the city, and the Queen will likely do nothing to stop him. With Sabina's help, the heroes manage to slay the dragon. Then they retreat to a side street in search of privacy and shelter. Away from prying eyes, Sabina comes clean, explaining that she's watched in horror as Ileosa has grown increasingly depraved. At first, she didn't want to believe it, but the involvement of dragons and devils, as well as the damnable crown of Fangs and its wicked aura, finally convinced her. The woman she once loved is well and truly gone, and the woman who remains must be stopped, so Korvosa might be spared from her wrath. After much interrogation, the heroes determine that Sabina is likely telling the truth, and that her defection is likely legitimate. Sabina asks to become a part of the rebellion, pointing out that any Grey Maidens who break their conditioning would likely surrender to her more readily than to Croft or any other rebellion leaders. As a show of good faith, Sabina also provides plenty of useful information on Ileosa's forces. She confirms that a small squad of Red Mantis assassins have returned to Castle Korvosa under the command of a new field captain named Caltania. She also confirms that Togomor, the new seneschal, is holed up in the castle, and is unlikely to be drawn out of hiding. Ileosa herself is surrounded by elite Grey Maiden guards, as well as the enchantress Vavana Datri, and a small army of conjured fiends. The heroes report back to Field Marshal Croft and the rebels, bringing Sabina with them. Croft processes everything Sabina says, then calls the rebel leaders together to plan their next move. The group comes to the conclusion that the time is right to strike the interior of Castle Korvosa. With Sabina's information, an incursion would likely gather enough evidence to prove Ileosa's guilt to the public. Only the heroes have the skills necessary to make the journey, and they accept this responsibility with a sense of grim but eager finality. After gathering information on the castle interior from Seneschal Neolandus, Sabina Marin, and Trinia Sabor, of all people, the heroes enter the palace via teleportation magic. That there is no protection against such a magical incursion raises suspicion, but Sabina has no explanation. The heroes enter the palace at the first level, and proceed to evade or defeat the castle's many defenders. Elite Grey Maidens attempt to stop them, but are ultimately unsuccessful. More dangerous are the many devils and hellbound monsters which lurk at guard posts and patrol the halls. The first major challenge the heroes face is on the second floor, when they encounter the bloated wizard Togomor. Togomor commands his aides and defenders to fight alongside him as he hurls spells, and he's only cut down once the heroes deal with them. As the heroes advance through the castle, the alarm is raised, and they're forced to battle larger and larger groups. The horned devil, Mavrocaris, leads a combined force of barbed devils and grey maidens defending the main entrance hall, and the heroes are forced into a prolonged pitched battle against superior numbers. After that victory, the heroes attempt to advance on the throne room. Before they can, however, they're hit by a magical compulsion, drawing them upwards to the royal bedchamber. As they arrive, they are greeted not by Ileosa, but by the corpulent form of Ser Magnato, a Beliar devil. Ser Magnato attacks the heroes, intending to strangle them one at a time while using his magic to keep the rest at bay. His arrogance, though, proves his undoing, as the heroes turn the tables and manage to strike him down once and for all. Concerned about forces on the upper floors which might try to encircle them if they return to the throne room, the heroes enter the upper floors of Castle Korvosa. They quickly draw the attention of a small but elite band of Red Mantis assassins, led by the fearsome Caltania. Caltania herself is thrilled to face the heroes, and is determined to make up for her underling Cinnabar's previous failures to kill them. Despite her incredible skill, however, Caltania too falls short, and the heroes put an end to the Red Mantis as an organization in Korvosa. The heroes climb to the highest towers in the castle, and there they make two important discoveries. First, they find the study of Queen Domina, the mother of old King Eodred. Ileosa, they piece together, commandeered this space to plan much of her takeover of the city. Within, the heroes find a treasure trove of documents, proving Ileosa's guilt, and her guiding hand in all the events which befell Korvosa, from the death of Eodred to even the origins of the Bloodveil Plague. The second major discovery in the castle heights is the lingering spirit of Venster Arabasti, Eodred's secret Nephilim brother. Venster, overcome with guilt for the part he played in his brother's death, confesses all he knows. He provides the heroes with more evidence of Ileosa's guilt, then fills them in on some of the magic she's been researching, which he was able to observe in secret with his spectral form. With these confessions, he at last passes on to the boneyard for judgment. Finally confident that they are not about to be surrounded by lingering forces, the heroes return to the second floor of the palace, ready for a final confrontation with Ileosa. They storm into the throne room and face down a full squad of Grey Maiden guards, alongside a pack of hellhounds. Ileosa herself commands her forces from the Crimson Throne, supporting them with her spells and bardic performance. She's backed up by the enchantress Vivana Daughtry. The fighting is fierce, but the heroes push forward. Eventually, the maidens and hellhounds are slain, and the heroes approach the Crimson Throne. They raise Serithtial high, then drive it through the Mad Queen's heart. Ileosa, the author of all of Korvosa's pain, screams, then melts into a puddle of blood. The crown of Fangs is nowhere to be found. For a moment, the heroes are stunned. Then they figure out what just happened. A blood simulacrum. The Ileosa they slew was a fake. The real queen remains at large. But Castle Korvosa is empty. Queen Ileosa and her crown of fangs have vanished. Ileosa's Story, Part 3. The Beliar devil, Ser Magnato, revealed himself to Ileosa not long after arriving at Castle Korvosa with his puppet Togomor. He offered to supplement Ileosa's power with an infernal contract, and Ileosa eagerly signed away her soul so Ser Magnato could summon fiendish forces from hell to her aid. His first offering was a squad of powerful Aranese devils who would serve as her bodyguards. Ileosa deemed these warrior women her Furies. Ser Magnato also bound a single Aranese to Ileosa's own flesh, imbuing her with diabolic power and increasing both her physical and arcane strength. The most potent contribution Ser Magnato made, however, was in the form of information. Long ago, in the ancient days of Thassalon, the Beliar devil had served Sortian, the mighty rune lord of lust. Though Sortian had long ago vanished from the world, and was in fact asleep in stasis beneath Castle Korvosa in the Grand Mastaba Pyramid, her ancient discoveries could offer immeasurable power to those willing to seek them out. Familiar with the legends of Sortian's incomparable beauty and eternal youth, Ileosa was immediately intrigued. She pumped Ser Magnato for information, and the devil produced an extensive text detailing many of Sortian's secrets. This led Ileosa to a passage about the Everdawn Pool, Sortian's most powerful tool, and the artifact from which she derived both her immortality and the ability to create a rune well. Ileosa had already empowered herself immensely, both with the powers of Khazavon through the Crown of Fangs and with her bound Aranese devil, but she was still well below the might of the legendary rune lords. Desiring the might of Sortian for herself, she resolved to push herself to new heights. She set herself to the task of researching the Everdawn Pool, employing the expertise of her mightiest and most learned allies. She discovered the lost Everdawn Pool's location, the ruined remains of the Shining Queen Pyramid, deep within the Mushfens. More importantly, however, she discovered the means of manipulating the pool and the ritual to imbue herself with immortality. This ritual was more vile than any act Ileosa had yet undertaken, and represented the final step on her journey into archvillainy. To obtain immortality, she would need to sacrifice the lives of thousands of citizens of Korvosa, so their life force might be added to hers. To accomplish this, she would need to gather blood samples from each of those citizens, then offer those blood samples to the Everdawn Pool. This blood harvesting might have proven logistically difficult had it not been for a cruel twist of fate. In her attempts to craft a plague which would rid her city of the poor and the ethnic minorities who disgusted her, Ileosa had inadvertently already established the perfect harvesting operation: Dr. Reiner de Vallis and his so-called physicians. That's right, Ileosa knew about the Everdawn Pool and its need for blood offerings as far back as the Blood Veil Plague. She'd been secretly gathering and storing blood samples since the beginning of de Vallis's so-called treatments, preparing to sacrifice the men, women, and children of Korvosa by the thousands to fuel her eternal youth. And by the time of the hero's return from Castle Scarwall, she'd gathered enough blood and finalized the preparations for her arcane ritual. In secret, Ileosa left Castle Korvosa, creating a blood simulacrum to rule in her place with the aid of Ser Magnato. She traveled deep into the Mushfens, bringing with her only her Aranese bodyguards. She found the ruins of the Shining Queen, now referred to as the Sunken Queen by the local Boggard tribes. She made her way to the top of the pyramid and found the Everdawn Pool within. Now she is only days away from completing her ritual, murdering thousands of her own citizens and transforming herself into a nigh unstoppable immortal threat. The final chapter, Legacy of Blood. The heroes report their tremendous success within Castle Korvosa to Field Marshal Cressida Croft, who immediately capitalizes on their momentum by deploying rebel forces into the city. The presence of Seneschal Neolandus quickly brings many of the nobles and churches in the city to the side of the rebellion, and the tales of the fall of the castle soon win over many more. Despite this sudden and dramatic turn of events, however, the rebel leaders are nervous. The absence of Ileosa fills them all with dread. The heroes re-examine the clues they found in the palace, poring over the journals of Togomor and Sermignato, and cross-referencing them with Ileosa's own notes from her study in the palace heights. After some intense research, the heroes finally piece together Ileosa's plans, and realize with horror the threat she still poses to the citizenry. They immediately report to Croft to make a plan. Though the field marshal is loath to lose her best champions as the fight for ground in the city carries on, she concedes that Ileosa is the greater threat, and orders the heroes into the Mushfens to put a stop to the queen's plot, once and for all. After some final preparations, the heroes set out. They teleport to the Mushfens, then follow Ileosa's own maps to the sunken Queen Pyramid. They fight their way past the local Boggard tribes to gain access to the ruins, then begin exploring the chambers within. The rooms are remarkably well preserved given their age, and the structure clearly once served as some sort of magic channeling device intended to support arcane experimentation with the Everdawn pool. Ileosa's last guardians here are her 4 mighty Furies, the Aranese devils summoned by Sermignato, as well as an ancient Scarlet Walker, bound to the site since the Thessalonian period. The fights are challenging, but the heroes push forward. Finally, the heroes enter the chamber at the apex of the pyramid, and there they find the Everdawn pool. The pool takes the form of an immense floating orb of blood, suspended nearly 20 feet in the air. As the heroes approach, the pool ripples, and Ileosa's face forms on its surface. She glares at the heroes and lets out a shriek. 6 blood simulacra erupt from the pool and fly at the heroes, as Ileosa herself, wearing her crown of fangs, emerges out of the pool and begins casting spells and channeling her bardic performance. The heroes are confident for a moment, until another form takes shape within the pool. From the orb of blood slithers an enormous serpentine dragon. While this creature bears many of the features of Kazavon from the waist up, its flesh is putrid and rotting. Muscles separate from bone as it moves, and it leaves a trail of filth and viscera in its wake. This is the Tananiver, the manifestation of Kazavon's spirit, which has merged with the Bloodveil plague, infecting Ileosa's blood offerings. In the face of such horrors, the heroes may have met their match, but they resolutely press on. The fighting is fierce, with Ileosa hurling her mightiest enchantment and illusion spells to support her simulacra, while the Tananiver fights with tooth, claw, and tail. Each strike from the rotting draconic corpse is tainted with Bloodveil, and its noxious breath weapon threatens to infect the heroes all at once. Even so, the heroes draw upon the lessons they've learned on their journey. They counter Ileosa's spells and parry her sword strikes. They evade the undead dragon's breath and catch its claws on their shields. Their spells and arrows are well placed, and their blades strike true. Finally, when Seriftial lands a lethal blow on Ileosa herself, the queen falls. Then, all hell breaks loose. As Ileosa dies with a scream, her attunement ritual with the Everdawn pool is cut short. The magical backlash is fierce and immediate. Arcs of arcane energy erupt from the pool and snatch hold of the crown of fangs, lifting it off the fallen queen's brow and drawing it into the orb of blood. The whole pyramid shakes, then the Everdawn pool begins to swirl violently. Lightning shoots out of the pool, and the sound of rattling chains, a sign of Zon Kuthon's wicked delight, fills the room. From the surface of the blood emerges a dripping draconic claw, but unlike the Tananiver, this one is well and truly alive. Another clawed limb emerges, and the heroes realize what is happening. In the absence of Ileosa, the Everdawn pool is channeling its magic through the crown of fangs, and attempting to restore to life Kazavon himself. In desperation, the heroes take up Seriftial one last time. They hurl it mightily, blade first, into the pool, and as soon as it makes contact with the surface, the blood orb explodes. Kazavon is torn apart, and Seriftial and the Crown of Fangs are thrown across the room. The heroes are knocked to their feet by the blinding explosion. When they regain their senses, the heroes notice something. Quiet. The battle has ended. While the Everdawn pool lingers in the air above, its motion is languid and slow. Kazavon is nowhere to be seen, and Ileosa remains dead, her corpse on the floor and her soul condemned to hell. The heroes take up Sarithial again, and the Blessed Blade makes short work of the crown of Fangs. The Fangs themselves remain indestructible, however, and the heroes are forced to gather them up for the Brotherhood of Bones. The heroes return to Korvosa, bearing the news of Ileosa's demise. By the time they return, the rebels have officially seized Castle Korvosa, and the Abadarian, Pharasman, Serenite, and Shelenite churches have helped to restore order. Sabina has convinced many of the Grey Maidens to surrender, and hopes that under her leadership they might reform into an organization which will allow the women to seek forgiveness and redeem themselves for their crimes. With the news of Ileosa's defeat, the remaining loyalist Grey Maidens flee Korvosa, separating into small warrior bands. The heroes return the Fangs of Kazavon to the Brotherhood of Bones, with the concern but acceptance of Thousand Bones and the Shoanti. While much work remains to build the relationship between the Shoanti and the Chelish colonizers, the defeat of Ileosa, and the critical role the Shoanti played in it, has been a significant first step. Field Marshal Cressida Croft is elected as the head of the new Korvosan ruling council, and within a few years will be elected as Korvosa's new queen. The quarantine on Old Korvosa is lifted, and medical supplies and healers are sent in to save the citizens. Food shipments are quickly restored to the city, and the starvation conditions among the people are finally relieved. Seeing that her people are finally safe, Zelara manifests one last time before the heroes. She bids her farewell, acknowledging that her purpose, preventing the vague doom her Herodek had warned her about, is complete. She passes on, hoping to find peace in the afterlife and be reunited with her lost son. The day is won. Korvosa is saved. So, that is the Curse of the Crimson Throne adventure path. I really hope my enthusiasm came through in this script, because I absolutely love this campaign. It's got so much going for it in terms of plot, setting, and characters. Ileosa is an all-time incredible villain, and her Grey Maidens are nothing short of iconic. They're so good that Paizo ended up bringing them back in 2 factions in future books, the benevolent Scarlet Roses and the malevolent Irenes Company. Check out my video on the Grey Maidens faction for more information on them. Beyond that, Blackjack is probably the single coolest NPC in all of Pathfinder, and the rest of the cast is filled out with memorable figures, like the overworked Cressida Croft, the delightfully off-kilter Lowry Vouse, and the complicated Thousand Bones, among many others. The city of Korvosa is nothing short of fantastic. In contrast to the earlier Rise of the Runelords AP, the decision by the writers to spend 5 out of 6 books in a single city for this campaign really allows Korvosa to come into its own as a setting. The city feels lived in and alive, with dozens of rich characters and factions running around and bouncing off of each other, and plenty of neighborhoods with distinct personalities. On top of all of that, the plot is just rich beyond belief. While the main plot I covered is fascinating all on its own, I think the AP's greatest strength is the sheer number of thematic threads you can pull on to make the story your own. When I ran it, I leaned hard into the colonialism elements of the story by adding a subplot surrounding a rebel Qua faction in Korvosa, consisting of Shoanti youths born under Chelish occupation who've lost much of their heritage and are banding together. I then cranked up the involvement of the Order of the Nail, culminating in a battle outside of the walls of Kermaga as the Quas of the Storval Plateau united with their city-dwelling brethren to smash the Nail Knights and send them running back to their fortress. And that's only one of the many threads you can play up in this campaign. The Cerulean Society is right there in the background. The Arconas have a lot going on in books 1 and 2 that the players don't really see. The other churches in the city could have just as much internal conflict as the Abadarians, which is a whole subplot I didn't even touch on in this video for the sake of time. Seriously, there is so much for players and GMs to sink their teeth into to make this campaign their own. I genuinely think this is probably the best AP Paizo ever produced. It's not perfect, no AP ever is or ever could be, but it's so easy to make great with only little tweaks and additions here and there. The only one I think comes close to this level of greatness in first edition is maybe Return of the Rune Lords, but that requires a huge amount of homework and baggage to fully understand. I've also heard that Hell's Rebels is similar in both tone and level of quality, but I haven't had the pleasure of reading or running that in detail yet. I've skimmed it, but not to the extent that I could give it a fair comparison. In 2E, meanwhile, my favorites are Season of Ghosts and Curtain Call, but I'll be the first to admit that their appeal is definitely more niche. Curse of the Crimson Throne is great for everybody. It's got intrigue, it's got action, it's got a villain you can hate, and heroes you can love. It's the best campaign I've ever run, and I look forward to running it again someday. Next month, I'll be back with something a little more modern. My video player's guide for last year's Myth Speaker Adventure Path. But first, June is Pride Month, so I need to celebrate with a video dedicated to everyone's favorite queer throuple, the Radiant Prism Pantheon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.